This is the Founders Catalyst. Okay. Lee, do you want to know something really cool?
You turned your computer off and back on again, and now it works?
That is really cool, but nobody would necessarily have known that had you not mentioned it. But the thing I was going to reference was the fact that this is episode 10. We made it to double digits. We're 10 episodes old. Do you know that immediately puts us 4 episodes above the average podcast? Isn't that insane? Wow. Most people start somewhere between 6 to 8. They just go, you know what? It's not worth it. It's not worth it anymore. And they pack it in. But here we are.
I think it is worth it. I think talking about leadership is always worth it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We've endured. We've made it to 10. Many more anniversaries to come. But today we're just going to piggyback off where we left last episode. We spoke so much about motivation from this more intrinsic perspective, how we as individuals can be motivated. And now we're going to look at it from more of an outside in, so from a cultural side of things. And we're going to do what we like to do on the show as the coaches, as the good coaches that we are, and try to frame the words specific to at least our experience and how we see it to begin with. So we're going to focus on culture. We're going to focus on culture. We're going to focus on eventually how we motivate people within it. And to begin with, mate, why don't you take a stab at defining this word culture for us?
Ooh. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because it's a word, a term that you hear thrown about a lot in media, by leadership coaches like us, books, gurus. What's culture? What does it mean? So I think to me, culture is what is the ethos and the guiding principle for how you run your company. And then how everybody fits in to that guiding principle with the specific aim of performing at your best. And then obviously through history, there's been lots of different versions of that. And there's been the authoritarian model where you have the strong leader that comes in, tells everybody what to do, and that's the culture. The leader knows everything. And as we have seen, as our understanding of human psyche and what motivates people and what keeps us happy and gives us purpose, as we understand that better, we realize that that model is not the most successful model. And that's not the model that you see in the highest performing sports teams, and it's not the model that you see in the highest performing businesses. And I think now we can get into, okay, so what is the model? And for me, it's a model where I, as an individual, know what the company mission is. The company mission is very clear. What are we here to do? I then understand, how do I fit into that company mission? What is my role? My role is very clear, and I understand if I execute my role, how that helps the company mission. How am I supporting what we're here to do? And I get to work with people that I enjoy working with because they're aligned on the company mission, and we are all aligned into how much effort we're prepared to put forward to support that company mission. And then we're aligned with what we think is appropriate feedback levels. So are we going to give each other feedback? Are we going to be able to give each other feedback in such a way that it matters and it moves the needle forwards? Or are we not going to give each other feedback, or are we going to give each other wishy-washy, fluffy feedback that doesn't really do anything? It just, it comes from a fear place that we don't want to upset each other. Personally, the best and most thriving cultures that I see, there is always a strong emphasis on healthy, direct, clear feedback that is actionable and that gives you as an individual the opportunity to grow, and therefore the organization the opportunity to grow.
Yeah, I like that you really anchored it in growth there at the end. I think that's where culture really speaks to me, is this notion of evolution, as a British person would say. I almost said evolution, but I wanted to just respect the fact that you're British. And a a lot of the time when I start working with organizations, they do speak about culture in terms of what's gotten them to where they are, which is fine. But something that you've just referenced there right at the end is this notion of how do we look ahead? How do we remain eager and interested about how this culture that is today can become what it can become in the future? Because again, we've come from sport, and as much as a thriving culture can position athletes to be so successful, the moment you start to take it for granted is the moment you lose it. You can never take your finger off the pulse with it, because it is this living, breathing organism, And so this idea of associating culture with growth, with evolution, with development, however you want to put it, I think is absolutely integral. Because without thinking about it forward thinking, you're really not thinking about it through the correct perspective to begin with. And all those elements that you've shared there speak for themselves, and I think people listening to this would say, yep, when I've felt culture, those are the things that I can tell are very evident. But I think, you and I are always operating in this space of this word that I use, optimal, and how can we be excellent, and how can we do it in a high-performing manner. And I think that's when you shift from culture of just saying, hey, what are we today, or what have we been that's got us here, and you shift out of that and you almost step into this notion of how can we continue to build upon it? Always, 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 and never take it for granted. Does that speak to you?
It does, and I think that's possibly a couple of things mixed. I think that's where culture meets the world of high performance. So when I think of my experiences in elite sport, and then taking those experiences and what I see in startups, one of the glaring differences to me is in elite sports, people are not afraid to upset each other. There is a level of directness that there has to be, because, my sport, track sprint cycling, 1,000th of a second can make the difference. There has been multiple world championships that have been won or lost by 1,000th of a second. I lost a world championship by less than 1/10 of a second. Mm-hmm. So you just can't play around. You have to be very direct with each other. That's teammates being direct with each other. That's coaches being direct with each other. That's coaches being direct with their athletes. And what I then have encountered in the startup world is this focus on culture and the buzzword of culture, where people think they can't be direct because it's going to upset the culture. Oh, I can't be too direct, or I can't be too clear here or too demanding here, because then I'm going to upset the culture and my people are going to leave me. You never think about that in the world of elite sports, because you're like, right, okay, we're in this together. This is where we're going. I'm the national team coach. Take it or leave it. So in the startup world, we're worried that people might leave us for another business. We're always worried about talent leaving us. And I think, therefore, what we do is we miss what talent wants. Now, what I want as a high performer is I want to be told how I'm performing, and I want to be told how I'm performing regularly, and I don't want you to lie to me to make me feel good. I want you to be very clear with me. How do I fit against my scorecard? So we create this scorecard of what my role is. How do I fit against it? How am I doing against it? What more do you see for me? How are you going to help me get there? How do you help me communicate with my colleagues so I help them get there? So that I feel like I'm on this ship that is sailing with a strong wind behind it, and we're all going in the same direction. So when I am working long hours, when I am doing things that I find difficult to do and challenging, I know why I'm doing it. And I think that's where a lot of motivation comes from. When we think about motivation, a lot of people, when they speak to me, they think that it's their job as a leader to motivate people. And I like to reflect to them that it's not their job to motivate people. It's their job to create conditions for people to thrive. And that motivation is going to come from the person themselves. As far as I'm concerned, you can't motivate someone unless you're going to threaten to kill them if they don't do it, or unless they're so hungry they'll do it because they're starving. Otherwise, any other kind of motivation is very short-lived. So if we want to create a long-term success, we have to find people that want to work with us, want to work in our organization because they believe the mission that we have, that we pay fairly. Like you've got to, one of the things I'm doing with the companies I work, we're removing all the fluff. So all the stuff that they used to have, all the stuff that came out of Google, we're removing all of that. Just pay them that themselves, and then they get to decide what they want to spend their money on. And just getting super clear about what is it we're here to do? What is the mission of the company, and how do you, Steve, fit into that mission? And do you understand it? Do you get that regular feedback on it? That, for me, is what creates a condition for thriving, and that's what culture is built from.
Yeah, and it's that expectation that leaders can put on themselves to say we can create a place that people can thrive. To actually embrace that challenge, because it is that. It's not as simple. Like here we are just sort of talking about some of the foundational principles around culture, but it's not a matter of like, okay, let me implement those and off I go with a great culture. Like it never stops. The work is endless. But to your point that you made a minute or so ago is when you allow yourself to embrace the expectations of a thriving environment, that's what we're trying to pursue. The environment creates an ability for someone to become motivated within it. You're no longer responsible for that. And to your point, like leaders will burden themselves with this responsibility of motivating an individual, thinking that they have to, when it's so interesting as we speak through this, is that you can get out of your own way as a leader. You can actually lighten your load by focusing collectively, because it isn't one individual's responsibility to govern and create a culture. You actually get to lighten your load by collectively working on this environment that people can then insert themselves into and just be, it serves as a catalyst then. It serves as the catalyst that it needs to be in order to bring the best out of a person, because you're not hiring someone who comes without motivation in the hope that you can suddenly put them in a place where they are now motivated. They've probably got a track record of being in places where they know what it means to be motivated. So you want to create a unique environment where that motivation that they already intrinsically have, to an extent, can now be somehow built upon, improved upon, elevated in some shape or form.
Yeah. In his book, Unreasonable Hospitality, that I think you've read now.
I'm about to read it again. I literally miss listening to it. It's that good a book.
It's so good. Anybody listening, get the book.
Yeah.
So in the book, Will Gouda, is it Will Gouda? I can't.
Something like that. Yeah, I can never get the last name right.
Yeah. So the author of the book and the former owner of 11 Park Madison, they voted the best restaurant in the world. He talks about giving ownership to his team. So giving them an area of ownership that they can take on. And I really believe in that. I really believe that if you want people to excel, give them something that they can own in your business, that is theirs to expand, that is theirs to find creative ways to do better. And you're empowering them and saying, I trust you. This is something that you've told me that you're interested in, that you want to push forward for our business. Take it, run with it, come to me with ideas. Tell me how you think you can make us better at this. And again, I come back to, we both like the terminology, the phrase of high performance. For me, high performance is knowing what I'm capable of, being around people that can see maybe that I'm capable of even more, and they want that from me. One, because our mission demands it. If we're really going to do something incredible, the mission demands even more from me. But two, because they want me to have the fulfillment of stepping into an even better version of myself. They want to create these opportunities for that. And we've all been around what I would call inspirational leaders. I could walk into the room as a cycling coach and I could get those athletes fired up. But that lasts for a moment. That lasts for that moment that we're in the room together. They walk out of there, right, yeah, let's go smash it. Let's go break world records. And everybody's cheering and excited. as a leader, you can't be with your team every moment of every day, geeing them up and cheering them on. So when I say, and when we say motivation needs to be intrinsic, you're right. And our job as leaders is to create these situations for people to thrive, and then pick the people that want to thrive in them. Mm-hmm. And pretty quickly, people will pick themselves out of it or select themselves out of it if they don't have that motivation. If they don't have the motivation that we're looking for, they'll select themselves out, and we kindly let them go to somewhere else where they'll be able to flourish. And we find somebody that wants to be part of our system. One of the reasons we're friends, one of the reasons I have most of the friends I have, is because they have the ability to give me feedback. And when they give me feedback, they do it in a way that is, Lee, I love you, and I want you to know this because I think there's more opportunity for you. I think here's a way that life can be better for you if you do X. Mm-hmm. That's what I want in life. And that's what I see with the best startup founders. Why do they hire people like me and you as coaches? Because they're desperate to be better versions of themselves, because they love it. They love thinking about, how can I do this better? They spend a lot of their time thinking about, how can I optimize this? How can I do this better? And it will be everything from how do they book their vacations to how do they run their company. It's the way they look at the world. How can I train a little bit better? How can I eat a little bit better? How can I motivate my team a bit better? How can I create a thriving culture? And they're the people that I want to be around. And if you're somebody that isn't interested in that and thinks, I just want to keep things exactly as they are, don't employ me as a coach, because we're not going to work for each other.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So I think we've painted a very clear picture here of what culture is. And you're even starting to touch on it now a little bit, is there's some ways that, we can watch a film and say, wow, look how inspiring that speech was, and I should start doing that every single morning to bring the best out of my people. But we're here now speaking into the truth of, how do we create it, and really start talking about that. And something that I've really leaned on when I think about positioning leaders to create culture is, how do we as coaches, how do we actually build this foundation of trust, of communication with the people that are responsible for the creation of the culture? Because what I've noticed in the last year or two of the work I've done with the executive teams I work with is, when I facilitate communication in a way with them that allows them to truly share what they feel, what they see, what they believe, that creates the best environment for trust to be built around those five, for instance. And now I get to watch those five collectively decide and collectively move and collectively strategize on behalf of a business which has about 200 plus employees. And so for me, I've come to find that that is one of the best places to start when it comes to actually creating the culture, to say, okay, identify who is truly responsible for it. And what I mean by that is, who's willing to answer for it? Who's willing to say, like, hey, if there is an issue culturally, you are okay stepping in front of the company and saying, I can address this because I have decided to be part of the group that is responsible for this. I think so. So starting there and saying, hey, who truly is responsible for this culture? And then before those 4, 5, 10 people suddenly take to the streets that is the business and start pounding on their chests about, this is who we are and this is what we believe, are they on the same page? Do they truly understand what this culture should look like and how they can be the ones that bring it to fruition? Because that's when the work really begins. If those people aren't aligned before you start speaking into culture, before you start trying to create these environments to position people to feel motivated, the likelihood of that culture lasting is immediately diminished. Can you do the work on the front end to firstly identify who it is that's responsible, and then bring those individuals together in a way where they can collectively then represent the culture to the organization? So I'd love to know where you start, mate, because for me in the last year or two, that's very much where I've started.
Yeah, really got my wheels turning here. So, firstly, I think we need to take a step back. I don't think you can have a good culture without authenticity in leadership. And what I mean by that is, if the leaders are playing a role rather than being themselves, everybody knows. If they're walking around with a mask on of, hey gang, let's do this together, and it doesn't feel authentic, everybody knows and feels that. So one of the first things that I do in my coaching with leaders is I help them drop that mask. And there can be a lack of trust of, oh, people won't like me if I'm my authentic self, or I might upset people. So I help people understand, right, who are you? Who are you really? And then don't be afraid to show people that. That's what they want. So you're talking about how we get connected, how we get to that vulnerable stage. It's by dropping these masks and being our authentic self. And then we can actually meet. We can really meet as human beings who see each other. Because we all see past it. You know, we've all been in those situations where we think this person doesn't mean what they're saying. So then we're coming to, okay, who owns culture in a company? And there's no way of getting round. It's the founder, the CEO, whoever is at the top of the tree has to own the culture for the company. Now, when I'm working with companies, often I'm working with head of people, head of HR. That's typically who finds me first, interviews me, brings me into the company because they see a need there to work on culture, to work on communication, to coach their top leaders. Now, they often have a good vision of what culture is and what it should be. They've spent a lot of their time working on culture, reading books on culture, listening to the podcasts on culture. If the most important people at the company, and by most important, I mean the highest on a totem pole, if those people don't buy in to what the HR or people leadership team want to do, they can't move the culture. So the leaders of the company absolutely have to buy in. And I love what you're talking about, you know, kind of hinting around group work. For me, group work with the leaders is vital. Almost every contract that I have, I do some kind of group work with the leaders of the company together. And again, it's another opportunity to get together, to get into a room, to let the mask drop, to be authentic with each other, to feel like they're in this together, to have me there as a moderator and facilitator. So should there be any disagreement, any confrontation, they know they're in a place where it's going to be guided in a way that they're going to come out of it. They're not going to get stuck or stay in it. And the point of that is to say the things that we need to say and then to be able to move forwards. And again, when I think about elite sport, my experience in elite sport was we said to each other the things that need to be said, often because there's so much momentum, right? Next big competition in a few weeks' time, like we've got to get this sorted. We can't keep training the way we are, or mechanic, you can't keep preparing the bikes the way you are, or aerodynamist, we need to find more speed. What are you doing? And that close-knit feeling of we're all in this together is very top of mind for elite sports people. And it can get a bit diluted in companies, as I say, with this fear of, oh, I'm going to push people too hard or we're going to lose people. In my experience, people who work really hard for somebody that they trust and that they believe cares as much as they do. Yep. One of the hardest things for me, one of the reasons I'm a founder is because I worked for companies that didn't care. The owner didn't care. The organization didn't care. The corporation didn't care. I want to work with people that care. I will work so hard if I think you care because I enjoy it. And I also want that feedback of where am I excelling? What am I doing really well? And where am I falling short so that I can keep working on it? So for me, I think the big keys are we have to be authentic. Leaders have to take responsibility for how they behave sets a culture. You can't be that leader that says, do as I say, but don't do as I do. You've got to set the example. You want people to give good feedback in the organization? Well, you better become a master at giving feedback so that you show other people how to do it. You want authenticity. You better step up on stage and tell people what you're struggling with and tell people what your plans are to improve. Yep. You want people to work hard. You better make sure that you're in the office working hard. And that doesn't mean we don't rest. I want to be very clear. I'm not into this whole grind culture, sleep when I'm dead. You should be given examples that you look after yourself, that you do put time in your day to do some training, do some exercise, that you do sleep. However, when we're switched on and working, we are switched on and working. We're not messing around.
Yeah, and I think there's so much to this leading by example in a collective way. You know, I think the leading by example is I mean, I literally just did a keynote on this a week or so ago, and this notion of, you know, leadership doesn't start with your title. Leadership starts with what you're willing to take responsibility for. And for me, when you individualize
Can you repeat that? Because I love that. So that
yeah,
again.
leadership is not defined by your title. Leadership is defined by what you're willing to take responsibility for. And
Can you explain that to me a bit more?
yeah, so for me, leadership has always started, and I want to be careful here that we don't get too far off topic. And what I will do as well is just emphasize that the next episode we're going to speak about how we can use coaching as a leadership tool. So in many ways, we're flowing into the next episode right now. So
we always do.
As we always do. But I think for me, responsibility is one of those things you have to understand, similar to what we're talking about here. Like, are you able to truly define and understand where you can be of most value in the role that you have? Whether it be, firstly, starting with you. You think about what it is you are responsible for in your role, what that job description says. Are you not only acknowledging that, but are you crushing it? If you're crushing it, then you can start to shift gears a little bit and think, okay, who am I responsible for, right? And how can I start to bridge some of those gaps between some of this work that I'm doing individually and then either showcasing it to these folks that I'm responsible for, or giving them space to come into my world a little bit and learn in terms of how I do what I do, why I do what I do, etc. But at the heart of that, to bring us back into this episode now, like at the heart of that, I think is, can you create a direction with that as a leader? And let's say you're one of the leaders in the company. Can you create a direction with that where you have 3, 4, 5 people on an executive team that as you're going about these individual responsibility, you're also checking in with one another and saying, are we all taking responsibility for what we are responsible for as individuals? Can we bring that work together and better understand how we can maybe even improve upon what we're taking responsibility for as individuals? And then now that we've built this greater relationship through that transparency, through that authentic communication, how do we now showcase this to the organization? How do we take this out, again, on the street, so to speak, pounding our chest, being an example, however you want to put it, but doing it in a way that is so true to ourselves, because all we've done is be super disciplined around taking stock. Like, are we taking stock for our responsibilities, first, foremost, the person in the mirror, and then collectively as an executive team as well? I think that is how we can start to showcase how we take responsibility for what we do. And then we now start to truly be the leader that we're asking, or the employee that we're asking other people to be within the organization. And I think there's also a great way to highlight here that, you know, this is what motivates people too. Like, this is really what motivates people when you think about it, is when they get to go back to their office and speak to a colleague who's on their level, so to speak, and they get to reference something that they've seen from a superior, from a leader within the organization, ideally someone in the most influential and powerful position within the company. Like, did you see the way they did that? And did you hear the way they explained what they did and why they did it? And did you feel what I felt when it came to the way they were authentic in that meeting just now, and they explained how they messed up and that they corrected and they somehow now redirected in the path that they know is better for both them and the company? Like, that's what you want. That's a culture right there. When someone goes away and is speaking on behalf of the business and speaking on behalf of the leader, when the key people in the business aren't even in the room, like that's culture now. And you'll notice that example, that wasn't people going back to their office and the work that they were doing. That's just how they connect with the mission, how they start to hear and identify why it is they're at work, what it is they want to do when they're there, and why they're excited to be there as well.
Yeah. I think as we come towards our ending here, there's a couple of things I want to do. The first thing I want to do is just touch on what good culture is not. So what are the pitfalls that I see happen? What are the things that I want people to be aware of and to step out of? So, and then I think we'll wrap up with a nice reminder of what we think good culture is, and just dovetail it. For me, the mistakes I see people make. So what are the biggest culture killers? Not taking responsibility, blaming everybody else. If you as a leader can't take responsibility, you create a culture of defensiveness. You create a culture of nobody wanting to take responsibility and blame everybody else. Nobody thrives in a culture where everybody is pointing a finger at everyone else and not taking responsibility themselves. So yes, responsibility is so important, and taking it and owning your mistakes, and accepting your wins and celebrating your wins, just as important. So things to look out for. Don't be defensive. Let go of that. Another one I see, and I understand the intent, and it's just misguided, unfortunately, is this: we're a family. No, you're not a family.
Nope.
Right? Your family is your family. A business is a business. And you can be teammates, and you can be great teammates, and you may be friends with some of your teammates. Some of my closest friends now are people that I've worked with, are ex-athletes of mine, or colleagues. You know, one of my closest friends was a guy that I worked with in real estate for years. But there's no expectation that your colleagues need to be your friends. They don't. You can care for people without having to feel like your friends and family. And then what happens when you pretend that they are your family is now, again, you make it difficult to have the conversations that you might need to have because you're afraid of upsetting somebody, because you're more worried about the friendship than you are about the performance.
Exactly.
And as a company, our focus should always be on our performance. How do we perform? How is that person performing? How am I performing? Not, oh my God, they're not going to want to go for a drink with me tonight because I've just given them some feedback that was a bit painful.
Right.
So drop the friend thing. Almost every startup I work with, I get in there, they call themselves fam, and I'm like, no, let's get rid of that straight away.
Right.
We're a team, and we're here to perform. And that performance is always the golden driver. And then gossip. Don't gossip. Right? Take responsibility. And don't get me wrong, it's okay to vent. Venting is a powerful tool that sometimes you need to vent. I'm struggling, or I'm struggling with this person. The difference between gossiping and venting is a tool to share what you're experiencing. And once you've vented, we should be looking at, okay, what's the solution? What do you need to do? What's the conversation you need to have with that person? What do you need to take responsibility for? Gossiping is when we do the venting part, but then we add a conspiratorial part to it. The person that we're sharing with, we try to get them on our side. Now we're doing a triangulation of it's us against this other person, or it's us against this company, or it's us against this belief, whatever it is. Gossiping, there's nothing that kills a company faster than gossiping. It absolutely destroys culture.
But the thing with gossiping though is, it's I love the example, because for me, when I think about what we've spoken about through these 30 minutes, it's okay, people are going to gossip if you're not portraying authenticity, if you're not creating trust. You know, so gossip is nothing but an issue that will derive from a lack of culture. You know, when you give people the permission to live in their truth, to be authentic, there's never going to be a moment where they feel compelled to go secretly assume something over here by the water cooler because they're upset at the way something went earlier that day. They're going to actually feel compelled to say, listen, I feel a certain way right now. And to your point, Lee, I want to go vent, and I want to go vent to someone that's really excited to listen to me. Sounds crazy, right? Like, someone's going to be pissed off, and they're going to want to share their emotion, and they're going to feel that there's actually someone who's interested to hear what it is they have to say, as opposed to going to someone who's just the first person that they see, sharing a thought that has absolutely zero concrete fact or reality in it. And suddenly now, to your point, we have this snowball that it can be gossip. You know, and I think that's the beauty of everything we've spoken about here, is that not only are we talking about how to create culture, we're highlighting that if you are now listening to these three areas that Lee just presented, And you're thinking, gosh, I think we experience those within our business. Well, we've given you the solution. We've given you the solution. Go back a few steps and start thinking about what are these foundational principles? How are we communicating as leaders? How are we showing up authentically, sharing what it is we can share in a way that makes people feel as though we're opening the door to ourselves as leaders as opposed to shutting it. And when you start to put these pieces in place, these other areas, they just become eradicated within the organization slowly over time. It takes time, but they do eventually start to disappear. And it's, the beauty of where we are now in this episode, and when I think about what we're going to discuss next too, is that as coaches, you and I, we get to exemplify everything that we're talking about with the leaders that we're talking to. To your point, when they tell you when you come in, it's just like, hey, we're a family. It's like, no, you're not. No, you're not. You're not. You can tell yourself you are, but you're not. And again, I had a really...
You shouldn't want to be, right?
You don't want to be. No, you don't want to be. You don't want to be. Again, like it's to your point, when you shift towards performance, when you shift towards representing yourself as a team, all these elements that we're talking to, you take these things more seriously. You're more willing to adapt them because you now see yourself for what you are. I have a wife and 2 children. We do not have meetings about the culture within our house. we don't.
Maybe you should.
We don't. We have our values. We have our principles in terms of who we are and how we show up each and every day. But the fact of the matter is, we're not trying to perform. We're not being measured about how we perform as a family. We don't have stakeholders out there outside our house every day saying, "Hey, the way you guys just had dinner, that's not good enough. That's not good enough. You need to complain less at dinner and eat quicker." We don't have that. We don't have measurables when it comes to that. But and yet we allow ourselves to use words like this, and then we wonder why we lessen the value of this stuff that we're talking about. And we do. The moment we set ourselves up for failure, when we use these words like family, and we allow ourselves to prioritize a friendship over truly building a relationship that serves high performance within a team setting. That's what we're talking about here.
Yeah. Friendship at work should be a byproduct,
absolutely,
not the aim. It should be something that happens because you just happen to find somebody that you really resonate with, but it shouldn't be the aim. We shouldn't be aiming to be friends with people we work with. We should be aiming to be great colleagues. And I think to wrap this up, I'm just trying to think about how we want to wrap this up. I think we want to really move into the next episode of like, okay, how do we do that? Mm-hmm. And I guess one last thing I want to share is, before we finish here, is culture is fragile. And by that, I mean, if you have one person in the organization that completely goes against your culture, they can corrode the culture of the organization pretty quickly. And I've seen this happen where organizations are too slow to get rid of somebody because they're like, they're our top performer, they're our top salesperson, but they're an absolute arse to everybody.
What I'm going to do, what I'm going to do here, Lee, is I'm actually going to interrupt you because this is an episode in itself. What you just highlighted is an episode in itself. It's not going to be our next episode, but it's going to be a future episode. I literally just underlined it right now because I could not be more in agreement with you. And my passion radar immediately started to go up a little bit, and I just thought this is too juicy a point.
If you're not watching this at home, he just leapt about a foot in his chair.
I know. Just like, listen, this is too good for us to dive into right now. So we're putting a pin in that, and that's going to be its own episode at some point down the road, because you're exactly right. But those outliers, that is a leader's dilemma that we need to address, I think, over the course of an entire episode. So that's something you can look forward to. And as I want to wrap up here, as you just did, and like for me, one thing I really want to encourage any leaders here to do is start looking at your weekly schedule and asking yourself, when you look at it right now, how much time are you investing purposely in collectively aligning yourself as a leadership team to serve the culture of your business? Is it such a priority that you're actually allocating time to work on it? If you think it's something you can do passively, you're wrong. It has to be so purposely done in order to actually establish what the potential of it can be. So look at your schedule. Is there a 30-minute, 60-minute, 90-minute window every single week that you're using to address this? If not, start looking at your schedule and finding it, because it works, folks. It really, really does.
Culture is just as important, if not more important, than the actual idea of your business.
Mm-hmm.
Like, whatever it is that your business does, if the culture's bad, you will not succeed. So culture is absolutely vital to performance. And, maybe a little job advert. That's why people employ me and Steve, because sometimes and often you need outside influences, sources, observers to come in and show you what you're missing, to point out what you cannot see, because we all have blind spots, and that includes organizations. And that's why I love doing the work that I do, because I can come in, I can support people with the stuff that they're not seeing, both individually for themselves and how it affects their leadership, and culturally, the whole team. And then we can address those things and get you thriving. And often they're not as complicated as you think. They just take a bit of uncomfortableness to get past.
We love some discomfort on this show. We really do. We really do. On that note, folks, as always, it's been a pleasure. Make sure you're subscribing. Make sure you're sharing these shows with folks in your world. If you're a leader listening to this and you have leaders within your organization that aren't listening to this, what a great place to start in terms of getting some alignment here. Just have everyone binge this episode real quick, listen to it, and start to actually drive culture, move forwards with what it is you're trying to accomplish within your world. We're on YouTube now, folks. We are both fairly attractive men, so I think it's getting comfortable just looking at our faces as opposed to simply listening to our dashing voices. So I think our voices are more impressive than our faces, but just to say, if you wanted to listen to us in a video format and watch us too, you have that option now. So don't forget that you can do that.
And for this episode, I am still doing my Vember, so you can see the delightful moustache that I am currently supporting.
Yeah, you might not go on YouTube now. It's fine. It's all good. All right, folks. Until next time. Thank you so much.